Hey everyone, Sombre here. This is another of my national overviews for one of my Warhammer nations for Dominions 5. The version of the mod that I'll be using for this one is, if we just go to mods, uh, current version is 2.52, and the nation I'll be looking at is Altdorf, which is the empire, one of the three empire nations that I put in. I separated the empire into three nations because it's got a lot of stuff and it covers a very large territory in the Warhammer lore. So Altdorf's the first one I'll be looking at, and then hopefully I'll do videos for Nuln and Middenheim, which are the other two. I'll be following my usual format of looking at the recruitable troops, giving an intro to the nation, looking at the recruitable troops, recruitable commanders, any heroes, national heroes the nation has, any national spells they have a quick look at their pretenders and maybe recommend some scales, and then we'll move on to any national mechanics, which there aren't very many for Altdorf, basically. All of their stuff is in the troops and commanders. The thing to remember about these is that they are national overviews, so I'm kind of introducing things about the nation and going through all of this stuff, but I'm not necessarily giving you a guide, this is how they should be played or anything like that. So temper your expectations there. As with all the Warhammer nations, Altdorf is in the Middle Ages. This is what they look like. Here's their flag, Altdorf, seat of the Emperor. Altdorf is the home of the colleges of magic, the seat of the Emperor and the capital of the Empire, the largest and most powerful realm of men in the old world. It is a land where magic, invention, and the courage of mortal men rub shoulders, each an essential weapon in the war against malign powers. The forces of Talabecland, Reichland, Ostermark, and the city-state of Marienburg align behind the crown of Altdorf. So for each of the Empire nations, I've decided which of the provinces are there, and then the kind of uniforms and heraldry of those provinces are represented. So, moving on to the national overview. National features: race, humans, very straightforward. These are the most normal, I guess you would say, of all of the nations in Warhammer. The most kind of standard. We've got humans. Their military is made up of medium and heavy infantry with extremely heavy cavalry, their knights, and dedicated missile units. Their magic is fantastic. Colleges allow access to all non-blood magic. So they don't have blood magic, but they do have every other path represented through their various college mages. Their priests are strong. They do have Holy Three priests. And they use standard forts. So let's go through the units next. Oh, actually, before I go through the units, I should just say what their capital income is. They start with the Palace of Altdorf, which gives them 1 air and 1 earth per turn. The Cathedral of Sigmar, that gives them 2 fire and 1 astral per turn, and then you can see that they've got their capital onlys there. They also have the University of Altdorf, giving them another capital only recruitable commander. So moving on to the troops, the units. Starting off, we have the Humble State Spearmen. All state troops have fairly okay map move, considering, because they're trained marchers and so on. But the State Spearman is really your very basic guy. He's got very basic stats. He doesn't cost very many resources. He only costs 8 gold, so pretty cheap. Lots of Spearmen in Dominions cost 10 gold, maybe 9 gold. So they do get kind of a nice discount with the State Spearman, but his stats are not terribly impressive. They're not really state troops, the state spearmen, because they're not taken terribly seriously. In the kind of Altdorf provinces, spearmen are the poor man's soldier. So they're kind of a bit more like militia, but they're okay quality. The use for these guys is the standard stuff: siege strength, siege defense, and so on. A little bit of line holding can be done because they do have a bit of repel. They are somewhat protected. They have a shield. They have okay armor. It's not great. Protection 10. Yeah, so as it says here, only slightly better than that of local militia or free infantry. Next, we have your sacred, which is actually a build anywhere sacred. So something that may be quite interesting for people who want to mess around with certain types of bless. The flagellant, these are very similar to the flagellants used by Marignon. You know, these are religious zealots who've whipped themselves into a frenzy, and they do in fact have Berserker 2, but they are undisciplined. You have to remember that, you can't give them orders. Flagellants are very low protection. They're not particularly tough. They've got more hit points than a normal human, but it doesn't matter that much. Their main benefits are they have high morale. Their stats are obviously pretty bad, but they do come with a two-handed flail. So 15 damage is not great, but it's not terrible. and they do get +2 attack versus shield and make 2 attacks. So they can hit things despite their low attack skill. If you put a certain bless on them, they could maybe be quite useful. Of course, they don't really cost very much in terms of upkeep because they are cheap sacreds. They're only 8 gold each, one of the most, one of the cheapest sacreds in the game. If you get the right bless on them, maybe you can do some useful things with them. But I think I tend to end up just purchasing some flagellants to just kind of hold things when I need high morale troops. They're good if you can put their protection up. That's a very important one in late game. They're kind of nice because they don't rout because of their high morale, and they're berserking. Moving on to the State Halberdier, this is the kind of iconic state troop of the Empire, particularly the provinces around Altdorf. 9 gold, so we're still talking about a discounted troop here. We have a lot more to recommend here. So he's got the basic stats, but he now has +1 morale. The map move is excellent. 16 map move is excellent. These are very well trained troops for marching around. Normal type stats, but their protection overall is pretty good, 14, because they've got a plate cuirass and an iron cap. And then their weapon is excellent. The halberd is a very strong weapon. It does have -1 to their attack, so they're attacking at a lower rate. But against high protection troops, you've got 22 damage. It's two-handed, so if you improve their strength using earth magic, then you get even more damage off. And sometimes, or half the time, it does pierce damage, which of course knocks through, it doesn't say it here, but it removes 20% of the enemy's protection as well. So they've got the ability to deal with very high protection things. They are a resource sink. They're 22 resources and 9 gold. So when you've got tons of resources through like production scales, or maybe later in the game, you can just crank out tons of state halberdiers. One other thing to mention about them, and this is kind of a Dominion standard, halberdiers tend to get a castle defense bonus, and they have this. So for the gold cost, they are brilliant at defending castles. So yeah, would definitely recommend making state halberdiers if you've got the resources to do so. Archers, so these are kind of a militia level archer. They've got precision 10, but their other stats are not very good. They have pretty bad protection. They don't cost very many resources, and they're only 9 gold, so you can use them. You do have fire magic, you can use them with flaming arrows. You can mass up lots of these guys, but they're just basic short burn dagger archers. Not a huge amount to say about them. Yeah, they're not really state troops. They don't have particularly great map move or anything. They're more like the spearmen. They've both got map move 12. The state swordsman is a state troop, so he again has that high map move. We've got the increased morale, but then we also have the better stats than most of the other state troops. We've got attack skill 11 and defense skill base 11, and then you get the shield and armor modifiers. They use a broadsword, which is a decent weapon. It's not particularly high damage, but you do get +1 attack and +1 defense. They have pretty decent armor, protection 14, same as the halberdier, but they've also got a shield. So they're better at surviving than the halberdier, but considerably less good at killing things because they have their lower damage profile and they don't have piercing damage. For 10 gold, 23 resources, though, I think that this is very competitive. Sword and shield infantry tend to struggle a little bit in Dominions. They lose their defense because of their encumbrance. I think it's every 10 encumbrance you lose 1 defense. So they can lose their defense fairly quickly, but their protection should keep going. And yeah, they're just very cheap. So I think state swordsmen are pretty good, medium infantry. Good against things that don't have a lot of protection, decent at holding the line. The state crossbowman has these similar benefits to the state troops. He's got good map move, he's got good morale, precision 10 only, but that's fine. He's got okay protection because he's got a chainmail cuirass. But the nice thing about these crossbowmen is they don't cost a huge amount of resources. So 10 gold, 13 resources, you get yourself a pretty reliable crossbowman with good map move. Not any good in melee, really. The dagger is not a very good melee weapon at all, obviously, but the crossbow is decent, scales a little bit with strength. I think, 1/3 strength scaling. And just having all of these other things like the good map move and morale means that these are good crossbows. Most importantly, of course, is that you can mass them because they're not a huge amount of resources. If you're using flaming arrows, the archers are better because you can just mass more of them more quickly, but crossbowmen are not bad to use with flaming arrows either. The crossbow itself is, being armor piercing is very nice. Free infantrymen can be recruited outside of forts as well, and they have chaos recruitment, meaning that if the province has turmoil scales, which I am not really going to recommend for this nation, but if the province does have turmoil scales because somebody with turmoil has invaded you perhaps, you can get free infantrymen a bit cheaper. If it's turmoil 3, they end up costing 7 gold, so pretty cheap. They're very low in resources, so you can spam these guys out very fast. Their stats are fine, they're just kind of normal, except their morale is not very good. The thing that is attractive about free infantrymen is that they are two-weapon fighters. They have a short sword and an axe. These are not bad damage profiles. The axe is pretty decent damage. The short sword does piercing, so it can get through protection a bit better. And short swords have these attack and defense bonuses. They can actually hold themselves pretty well. The fact that you can get them in whatever province just means that you can use them to beef up your armies at short notice, and you can use them a little bit in expansion, but don't expect them to stick around and survive because they do have low protection and not particularly good defense either. Moving on to the more elite troops, we have the Greatsword. Greatswords are very exciting because they have Empire full plate, which is basically full plate mail but slightly better. It does mean that you have very high encumbrance and their map move is not so good because of this heavy armor that they're wearing. However, they do end up with excellent protection overall. You can see their body protection is at 22 and their head protection is at 16. In the graphic, they've got a kind of floppy hat on, but I have chosen to give them an iron cap underneath that. Greatswords hit very hard. 22 damage is absolutely fine, slashing. They have pretty great stats. Their base stats are 11 in attack and defense, and then they've got their weapon modifiers. The Greatsword gives you +1 attack, +2 defense. They have a little bit extra hit points. Their morale is excellent, 13 morale, very strong. Normal magic resistance and so on, but 13 morale is definitely nothing to sniff at. And then they also have Bodyguard 1, so if you do have the enemy coming after you with assassins, it can be useful to have a few Greatswords bodyguarding your guys. But the most exciting things about these, high protection, high damage output, okay stats, good morale. For 14 gold and 39 resources, they're definitely a resource sink unit. So if you've got high production or you want to save your gold, you can produce these guys. But yeah, pretty great for 14 gold, I would say. A good, reliable heavy infantry. You can compare them with the Ulmish Zweihanders, and they're kind of a favourable comparison there. Reichsguard Foot, these guys can only be recruited in the capital. They're quite similar to the Greatswords, except for they suffer from the fact that they don't have that two-handed weapon. Two-handed weapon on this kind of infantry tends to be better in Dominions. Instead, they have a broadsword and a shield. Because of the shield and the fact they've got Empire full plate and a full helmet, they've got high protection, and they are overall very good at surviving because of the shield. Their base stats are good. They've got 12 attack and 12 defense skill base. They've got an extra hit point again, so 12 hit points. An extra point of strength, although they don't hit super hard because they're just using a broadsword. They have two special abilities, castle defense bonus of 2, which means they are very nice castle defenders, and bodyguard of 2, so very nice bodyguards. Basically, the Reichsguard Foot does everything Greatsword does, except it doesn't hit hard. But their morale, overall stats, survivability, and so on are very good. They're 15 gold, 41 resources, so again a resource sink unit, but you have to remember that these are capital only, and crucially don't have very good map move. So they're kind of for protecting your heartland and maybe not a huge amount else. They have low combat speed and high encumbrance and so on as well. So yeah, they're heavy infantry. I think they've not proven to be terribly popular with people, but for the price, I think they're okay. They can be a little bit of a vanity unit, like you're going, oh, I've got my elite stay-at-home guard, basically. That's how I've seen a lot of people using them. The Nobleborn are your first cavalry unit. They are cheap cavalry, but I would not call them light cavalry. So they're 25 gold, 36 resources. So again, you probably want to be going production with this and using these as a kind of a little bit of a resource sink. They're not a way of just quickly spending gold without spending many resources. But the reason I say that they're not light cavalry is that they have pretty high protection. So they have 18 overall. Their weaponry is a broadsword. Their horse, of course, has a hoof attack. And then they also have a hand crossbow. The hand crossbow can be used in melee, but there's only a chance of it being used in melee. It only has 2 shots, and it can shoot at 10 range, but it's 6 damage, armor piercing. So it is a ranged weapon, but also can be used, when they're getting into melee. The fact that it's only got 2 ammo means you're not really going to be using them to pelt people with crossbow bolts or anything. But the nice thing is that if you just set them to go and fire a unit, they'll run up, fire their 2 shots, and then they'll fight in close combat. As medium cavalry, they're pretty decent. They don't have a shield. Shields work very well on cavalry because of the way the defense skill and harassment penalties work in cavalry. They don't have them, which means that they can end up taking damage, but their protection's good enough. So if you are up against enemies that don't have particularly high damage output, I think the Nobleborn can actually do pretty well in melee. And if you are up against enemies that have relatively high but not super high protection, then the hand crossbow can actually get some decent damage. And 9 armor piercing damage with a pierce damage profile is pretty decent. So yeah, the The Nobleborn, I would say, decent medium cavalry, nothing massively exciting. Okay resource sink, but they do have decent map move. They're very fast. Once they actually get into combat, you can use them for flanking and so on. Not true heavy cavalry though, and you do have true heavy cavalry. You have the Order Knights. So these are 35 gold each, and commensurately a lot more powerful than the Nobleborn. Order Knights have a lance attack, which is very important because you get that massive heavy weapon charge bonus. So they can kill very high protection things. They can kill things, do a lot of hit points worth of damage. They have the standard hoof, and then they have a broadsword. It's nice the broadsword comes after the hoof attack, so you get the harassment penalty from the hoof, and then the more powerful, more damaging broadsword attack comes after that. But the real draw of Order Knights is their survivability. They have Empire full plate and a full helmet, so we're talking very high protection here, 21-22. They also have a kite shield, which is the superior form of shield, and works great on cavalry. So their starting defense skill, including the shield parry, is all the way up to 15. So the first few attacks against them, a lot of them will end up hitting the shield, and then they've got a huge amount of protection when you combine all of those things. Their resource cost is, little less than double their gold cost. So again, it's kind of a resource sink unit, and you may not be able to get a huge number of these for using an expansion, but I would say decent heavy cavalry. I would not confuse them with the combat ability of some of the knights in some of the vanilla Dominions nations or the Bretonnian knights. They don't have quite as much damage output. They do have better protection in general, but their base stats are not so amazing. So they have basic attack skill of 11, base defense skill of 11 hit points and 11 strength. So they're kind of like semi-elite rather than super elite knights. But yeah, incredibly tough in terms of protection. Then you also have the Demigryph Order Knight. You can only have a single one of these recruited each month, but they're not capital only. So in each of your forts, you can get one Demigryph Order Knight per month. I'm not sure that the Demigryph Order Knight is correctly balanced at the moment. It is very expensive, 65 gold. That's now eclipsing the resource cost. Everything that I have said about the Order Knight is true about the Demigryph Order Knight. It has the lance as well. The thing that it has in addition is that it has Demigryph Talons attack. So the strength of the build is not added because it's the mount strength that's being used. They do have very high armor piercing damage, 15 armor piercing damage and 2 attacks. Is pretty great. If you can actually land these, so if you're against enemies that have low defense, high protection, where you can really make the most of that 15 armor piercing damage, and 2 attacks as well, you can really shred them up with this. But you can't mass demigryphs very much because you can only get 1 per fort, and they are quite expensive. They do have an increase in hit points, which makes them more survivable. They do have very good morale because of the ferocity of the demigryph. But I think people have just found them a bit underwhelming just because they can't get so many of them, and I think they need to be used against a very specific type of troop to make the most of that armor piercing damage. So that is all of your recruitable troops, and let's move on to recruitable commanders next. Okay, so going left to right, we start off with a basic scout. You all know the basic scout. They are no different than any other. You have your basic commander, the state captain, although he's actually not too bad a leader. He gives a squad morale bonus, so he's a bit better than the basic leader who normally has 40 leadership. So he actually has the squad morale bonus and the ability to hold 3 squads and to do formations, but he can only command 40 units, so he's a bit unusual in that sense. He's got the standard Warhammer stuff of a tier 1 commander. He gets 1 point of unsurroundable, he gets a bit of extra magic resistance and so on. That's the standard thing I do to make military commanders a bit better. But he's pretty standard, the state captain, other than he does take a few resources because he gets decent plate equipment and the like. I'm going to skip over these tributes so you can see that there's 5 tribute commanders available, and I'm skipping those because after I've talked about all the commanders, I'll talk about those before I talk about summons and things. So we'll skip past those. We've got the general, 2 recruitment points. This is your advanced military commander. He comes with a much larger amount of leadership, 120 versus 40. He can support 4 squads and gives a squad morale bonus of +2. And of course, he's a better combatant. Although he's not particularly strong, he's only unsurroundable 2. A lot of my Warhammer nations have their higher tier military commander be unsurroundable 3. The Empire's not that into very strong, like heroic combatants. For their state troops, they just use generals who have got more kind of training and education. But high protection, he's mounted, decent stats. I don't think you'd want to thug with him or anything, but 25 hit points, he can survive pretty well, and you can use him to lead around heavy cavalry and the like, because he's got okay map move, 18, it's not too bad. So skipping past those, we have a basic Holy One, the Initiate of Sigmar. He is cheap for a Holy One. 30 gold Holy One Priest's pretty decent. Not really much else to say about those. They're just a way of getting Holy Ones. They're available everywhere. You can use them to bless up your flagellants. They're not particularly good leaders, I should say. Oh, in fact, they can't lead at all. Leadership 0, so you can't have them leading around small groups of flagellants. You just have to have them with the army, but they're cheap. Then you've got your better version of the priest, the Warrior Priest of Sigmar. They are Holy 2s. They are fairly aggressively costed, considering they're Holy 2s. And they actually have a bunch of combat-based abilities. They've got Unsurroundable 1, they've got Inspirational, and 40 Leadership. So they can't do formations, but you do get +1 morale. They're unsurroundable, and they have Combat Caster, representing that they're kind of good at fighting. And their armor is pretty good. They have pretty decent protection. Not great magic resistance. That should maybe be a point higher, like 12. I'm not sure, but yeah, good morale. I wouldn't use them for thugging or anything, but in theory you could with a certain bless. Maybe they could do something. They are 2 recruitment points though, being a level 2 priest. The Initiate Sigmar is only 1 recruitment point, so you can get 2 of those a turn, which is a nice advantage. I forgot to mention. Another 2 recruitment point commander who is not a mage is the Witch Hunter. So he's an alternative to the Warrior Priest, another Holy 2. But he has Inquisitor. Inquisitor's pretty great. It makes you have basically count as a Holy 4 when you're preaching against other faiths. So if you're using him to preach out enemy dominion, or if they're very useful when you've like beaten up the enemy, you've sieged their capital, and you want to try and dominion kill them. Witch Hunters are your friend in that case. They also have a big patrol bonus. They're good patrollers, but on the other hand, they cause unrest. So if you have them patrolling somewhere, they will get the unrest down because they'll cause unrest and then patrol it out. But that will end up with them killing people. So they can maintain order, but it involves killing people. They're kind of better to go along with your advancing armies, just as a Holy 2, and maybe doing some Inquisitor type stuff and causing unrest as they charge around. They can fight pretty well, but they don't have very good protection. They have a cool, badass-looking sprite, kind of a Van Helsing look there, and they do have a couple of extra abilities. They've got the broadsword, they've got Halt Demon just built in, so they can just go Halt Demon, stop that. But magic resistance negates, but it can be somewhat useful in theory. It's more of a thematic thing, a decorative element though. And then they've got the Righteous Crossbow, which really messes up undead or demons, because ×3 is applied before it does damage through protection, so it can do a ton of damage. I think that's true. Anyway, ×3 is very strong, and it's relatively precise, and yeah, does a lot of damage. I don't know that it's necessarily that reliable, but in theory, I guess you could use the Righteous Crossbow to shoot up some demons or undead who didn't have pierce resistance, didn't have good shield or air shield or whatever to avoid being shot with it. If you get close and fire, maybe you'll be able to hit some with that, but it's more of a this is cool, a cool idea, but maybe you won't be able to do it. Anyway, 130 gold for an Inquisitor H2 is not the worst thing in the world. So now we're moving on to the mages. Now, Altdorf, this is the thing that the nation is most famous for. Some people call it Wizardville or Magetown. It has all of the colleges of magic represented, so there are 8 of them, and you've got your basic mage for each of the colleges of magic. So these are actually different prices for each of the Empire factions for Nuln, Middenheim, and Altdorf. I'm not going to go into the exact differences between them, only to say that Altdorf has none of these are capital only, and none of them are slow to recruit. They're all 2 recruitment points. Some of the other nations, they're either capital only or slow to recruit, and they cost a bit more. Altdorf has the best spread of the cheaper mages, and its very cheapest is the Bright Wizard. They get very discounted. So let's start with them. The iconic Fire Mage. So Bright Wizards cast Phoenix Power at battle start. So in battles, they're actually level 3 Fire Mages, although bear in mind that that means they can't cast Phoenix Power, so don't treat that, normally a level 3 you would cast Phoenix Power anyway and go up to 4, but they can go up to 3 automatically, and then they can cast Fire Elementals, they can cast Fire Evocations obviously. They've got good precision, which is nice for casting Evocations. They've got pretty decent stats, 11 hit points is not the worst. They're not old or anything, they have a little bit of combat stats going on. They've got Combat Caster, which can be pretty useful. if you do have to get flanked or something, and they got fire resistance. They're not amazing researchers for the cost, but they're not bad. 150 for 9 is not the worst. So that's your Bright Wizards. Grey Wizards come with some other cool abilities. So they have more built-in magic than the Fire Mages, but it's a bit more spread out. So they've got Air Mage 2. Obviously, Air 2 is extremely useful. You can do Lightning Bolts, Cloud Trapezes, and so on and so on. Lots of useful things. You can also Mist Form yourself to set up trouble. And then they've got a random Astral and Death. So Air Death can be good with boosters and things. You can cast some very nasty Air Death spells. And Astral obviously means that you can take part in communions, and you can get these up to high Air Mage by having been communion masters and then giving them communion slaves to push up their air magic. So these are really good paths. They're a bit more expensive than the Bright Wizards. They're 170, and their stats in general are a bit worse. However, they are stealthy. They are actually pretty dang stealthy. Stealthy 60 is pretty good. 40 is the base value. They have dark vision because they are mages of the dark and shadows, and they are spies. So these are really useful abilities to have. Spy is just kind of a nice to have considering they're quite expensive. But stealthy is great for keeping them out of trouble. Obviously, they can cloud trapeze somewhere, do something, maybe take something with very little defense, and then they can stealth away, avoiding any magic phase retaliation. So very nice abilities on the Grey Wizard. Very versatile, and they're very popular. People make a lot of those. The Celestial Wizard is a kind of a research powerhouse. So they come with Air 1, Astral 1, so guaranteed good stuff for doing communions and the like, but then they also have Air 1, Astral 1 random. So some of them will end up with Air 2, Astral 1, the same as some of your Grey Wizards. Some of them will be Astral 2 or S2, Air 1, and then Astral 2 obviously unlocks quite a lot of different things for you. They have great research ability for the cost, 170 for 16, very nice. You don't even need magic scales or anything for that to be really good. And they have Fortune Teller, so you can leave them at home and they can protect your capital from bad events, or you can leave them in, your various forts. It helps protect them from bad events. They have shock resistance. Their stats in general are worse than others. They have lower hit points and strength, and skill, and so on. So they're a bit more likely to die to remotes and battlefield-wide stuff. The Amethyst Wizard has not got any randoms. He's another fixed path one. He's got 2 death and 1 astral. I made the decision, obviously they're forbidden from doing any undead stuff, but because we're adapting Warhammer to Dominions, I've just said, yeah, it's death magic they can use. They can summon up skeletons and so on. So it's the typical things, Horde of Skeletons, Raise Dead, and so on you do with a death 2. Maybe put some gems on them and do shadow blasts. They also have Adept Researcher, but it's not as good as the Celestial Wizard. So you're going to want some Amethysts, obviously, for doing death searching. These are very useful paths. You can do big death in combats by doing communions with them, but they're not quite as good for research as the Celestials. The Amber Wizard is your rough, tough boy. He comes with Nature Magic 2 and Earth Magic 1, so these are okay thugging paths. His stats are actually fairly good, although he has bad protection built in. He can Iron Skin himself, obviously, and give himself, personal regeneration, things like that with the Nature Magic. He's got built-in poison resistance, and then he's got a lot of survival abilities, so he's pretty good in terms of his map move. You can see map move 18. If we look at the Celestials, they've got like 14. Who is particularly slow? Oh, Amethysts are good at roaming around as well. They've got 18, but yeah. Amber Wizards, good map move, lots of survival, so they're quite mobile. They also have a good built-in weapon, the Thorn Spear, and Snow Move. So yeah, I think generally useful. Nature 2 is perhaps not as useful as Death 2, Air 2, or Astral 2, but it still is useful to have. You're definitely going to want to have a bit of all of these mages, really. They're not really strong researchers, though. 11 points for 170, not very exciting. Light Wizards. So Light Wizards are another good researcher. They've got +5, so it's 16 for 170. I believe that's the same as Celestial, 16 for 170. So this is another stay at home and research mage. They have guaranteed Astral 2, so if you want Astral 2s, this is the one to go for, but then they also have Fire. Fire Astral has a few things in it, but it's not that exciting a path combination. They come, however, with something which is quite cool. They have the Mirror of Hysh ability. So it's got super long range. It's armor piercing, but very low damage, but it does extra damage against undead and demons. You can pick away at stuff by doing the Mirror of Hysh over and over and over again during a fight. And it has Air Effect 1, so it can blast up undead without you having any spells. So it's maybe good early on in the game if there's certain undead are a bit vulnerable to this. And then it has 30 ammunition. One of the nice things about having 30 ammunition is if you are a Communion Master, and you want to stop fatiguing out all of your communion slaves, you can switch them from casting spells to just firing the missile weapon. So having this built-in missile weapon is really good. They can fire at anything, but they tend to fire at undead and demons, obviously, because of the bonus. So yeah, they make good communion masters for that reason. And ultimately, the Jade Wizard Jay's Wizards are a bit unusual, but they have a couple of things that make them really cool. So they're not great researchers. They do have forest survival, and they do come with a supply bonus, which is good. They are disease healers. This is the kind of semi-exciting thing about them. If you end up with some mages who are diseased, or important things are diseased, or if your pretender gets diseased, having a disease healer is really nice. They're not full healers. They can't heal all afflictions, but having a disease healer is very nice indeed. They have great map move because they can move really far. They're not quite as survivally as the Amber Wizards, but the fact they've got big map move and forest survival means they can move really far. And they give you access to water, which you didn't otherwise have on the other mages you've seen. And then we've got one air or one earth. So they always end up as 1/1/1s. They don't have any depth, but they've got this breadth. And that plus the good map move makes them good site searchers. The fact you can boost up water easily and you've already got nature, water and nature you can combine up. You can maybe get to foul vapors using these guys. You've got good cross paths basically. You've got a whole bunch of cross path options. So yeah, pretty useful. I think also, oh no, they do have foot slots because they're barefoot. Maybe they're wearing sandals. I couldn't remember if they had to be barefooted to use nature powers, but I guess I've not gone with that. The Gold Wizard is another useful utility stay-at-home mage, but he also has good combat paths. So he's your Earth 2 guaranteed. Obviously, Earth 2 can cast Earth Bearing it to Earth 3. Obviously, Earth and Fire are very good for forging things, and crucially, he does come with a forge bonus. So you get a discount of 1 on everything. So you can use this guy with a Dwarven Hammer, Earth Boots to forge various things that are Earth items and get good discounts on them. And he's also got Fire and Poison resistance built in. He has one other thing which is cool, which is the Explosive Flask attack. So this is a missile attack. It doesn't come up very often, but I have seen it do very funny things sometimes. He has 3 of these. They have air effect too, so quite a big explosion, and he can throw them not very far, but it's far enough that he can sometimes just blow stuff up. I've seen them blow themselves up as well, which is quite funny. But it's pretty good damage. Area effect 2, 10 magical fire damage, and it's armor piercing. You can mess some stuff up with that, and it does come up rarely, but it does sometimes come up. So that's all the colleges of magic. I'm going to cover the summons to do with the colleges as well, but that's the recruitable ones. Then you've got some capital onlys. You've got the scholar, can only be recruited in the capital, and he is a fantastically gold efficient researcher, but he is not a mage, so he can't do anything useful magic wise. For 70 gold, you get 13 built-in research ability, and because he's a philosopher, if you've got sloth, so let's say we've got 3 sloth. Let's say we've gone sloth. I'm not necessarily going to recommend this in the scales, but let's say you've got 3 sloth. 70 gold, 2 recruitment points. You get 16 research ability. They also come with 15 siege bonus and 15 castle defense. So if you imagine you've built a few of these and you've sat them in your capital, that's likely where they're going to be. Or if you manage to get something that caused sloth somewhere, it would be wonderful for them. But wherever they're sat, you're going to end up with a bunch of castle defense extra, which is really welcome for a researcher. So these are kind of nice, but they are capital only, and you'll often just want to be recruiting mages instead, obviously, because the way Dominions works. And of course, the temptation of taking sloth. Is it a good idea with given what we've talked about with the troops, all of the resource dumps? Well, we'll talk about that in the scales discussion. Next capital only is the Arch Lector of Sigmar. So 2 recruitment points gets you an old, but he is old, but he is a Holy 3. A Priest level 3 is a really nice thing for a nation to have. It gives you access to Divine Blessing and Smite, obviously, but the most important thing is that it gives you a way of easily having somebody who can claim a throne. So in addition to your profit, you've got these H3s rolling around, and they're only 2 recruitment points. That's not too expensive, and they're only 160 gold. That's not too expensive. So it represents Altdorf's religiosity that they've got access to. 1 CP Holy 1s, they've got access to 2 CP Holy 2s, 2 different types of them, and then they've got Holy 3 as well. Now, if you like that, in theory, you should love the War Altar of Sigmar. It's your other capital only priest. He is 4 recruitment points, so takes 2 turns to recruit usually, but he has some interesting stuff. So in addition to being an Archlector, and therefore being Priest level 3, he is also able to recuperate. He's able to trample, but don't try and trample people with him. He's got terrible combat speed, and he's not built for fighting. He's got 10 hit points. Don't do that. Inspirational +2 and leadership 40, so he can lead decent, squads of flagellants and the like. He's got unsurroundability and affliction resistance. He cannot, in fact, be afflicted at all. He comes into battle with 2d6 flagellants in every battle. So this is a unit, this is a commander rather, where you want to be sending him in, and don't try and trample him or do any thugging with him. You can see he's got terrible. He's only got 1 crown slot and 2 miss. Don't do any of that. The simple fact about the Warrior of Sigma, the thing that makes it exciting is you can send him into battles and he'll give you some free flagellants, and he is a holy 3, and then you can keep him alive. He can leave the battle, live to fight another day, and every turn he's going to spread 1 of your Dominion. It is very, very rare. In fact, I don't think any of the vanilla editions have anything like this. To have a Dominion spreader you can just recruit. Some people might get a bit overexcited by this and go, okay, in your capital you just want to be always making these and then dom kill people with them. But that can't really compete with just building loads of temples and doing blood sacrificing and things that other nations can do. However, it does add to your Dominion. You can take these and locally spread Dominion, so you can bring a bunch of War Altars to help dom kill somebody. You've got a Holy 2 Inquisitor. It is definitely possible to besiege somebody, maybe not be able to crack into their fort because it's full of nasty stuff, not want to, and then just dom kill them using things like the War Altar. Note here that the full graphic will be used outside the recruitment screen, so when you recruit this guy, that you see the full War Altar, and I will show you that now. So I quickly just made a test game here so I could show you the full sprite. Here is Leopold the War Altar of Sigma, and there he is in all of his glory. Big old War Altar being pulled by a horsey. And he's got his flagellants going with him. This commander has a hidden malice to a non-holy path, so it wouldn't be a good idea to try and empower it. There's just a warning there because people have tried to do some clever stuff with empowering him. Yeah, we're not having that. The other thing to note is that should the Archlector be struck down in battle, remember he only has 10 hit points, it could literally just be a stray arrow that takes him out. The War Altar will remain, and a new Archlector will take the pulpit after the battle concludes. So he'll turn into just a War Altar that sat there, which is quite tough actually. And then if he survives the battle, you get another Archlector, so you get to keep your... He's not as vulnerable as he looks like, or as it seems he might be. So let's go back to the commanders. That was all the recruitable commanders, the mages and priests and the like, but then I said I would come back and talk about the knightly orders, the tributes. So now I will, and this is quite an interesting thing that the nation has access to. So you've got access to these 5 tributes. Each of these tributes is basically a statue where you spend a bunch of money and resources to go, we really think you're cool, to a particular knightly order, and because you give them this tribute, they then agree to fight for you and help you. So every time you buy a tribute, basically what you end up with, so this one, tribute to the Hunters of the Sigmar, 2 recruitment points, so 2 commander points to recruit this. When you recruit it for the first time, you will instead get a unique leader with a force of 12 knights. Subsequent recruitment will instead give you the same number of knights and an inferior non-unique knight commander, so only the first time you recruit this do you get the superior and unique, like heroic knight commander. After then, you get a replacement. You must have at least 1 province defense in the province for this to happen, otherwise the tribute will sit there until you do. So if you recruit this with no province defense, this event that gives you the knights and gives you the Grand Master or the leader will not trigger at all. He'll just sit there and do nothing, and this is not a useful thing to have, just a statue sat there, right? So if you're under siege, you won't have province defense, and you won't be able to get him. If you recruit one of these, and that same turn that you recruit it, you're put under siege in a fort, he'll just be sat there in the siege until you lift it and give yourself 1 province defense at least, and then you will get the tribute. So that's just a note on how those work. That's how it has to work. So what do you get? Tribute to the Hunters of Sigmar. Let's have a look here at this preview site, Altdorf Knightly Orders. Here is a Hunter of Sigmar. As you can see, a Hunter of Sigmar is basically like an order knight, but with slightly different stats. And each of the different knightly orders has a different set of stats and kind of different qualities and things they have. Hunters of Sigmar have a bit less protection than usual. They don't have lances. They're kind of like inferior. They're a bit hedge knighty. They're a bit beaten up. But some things they do have going for them is they have a supply bonus, they have forest survival, and they have snow move and good map move. So they're a bit more mobile than some of the others. The Grand Master of Sigmar's Hunters is Jerick Wildorn. He's pretty cool. He has better protection and stats and everything. He actually is a kind of tier 3 guy. He's got Unsurroundable 3 and good magic resistance. He's got Beastmaster, and he's got a bunch of survivals. He also has Animal Law, which can be situationally somewhat useful. And he comes with this magical item built into him, the Zarnbull Helm. So the Zarnbull Helm gives you lots of head protection, and it gives you protection from magic, which is already built into his stat line. He then has a built-in magical weapon. He has a hoof attack and the Axe of Hate. The Axe of Hate hits very hard. It has very high attack, and it does fatigue and disease, so he can be used to kind of thug or pretend to kill because of that, so he can be useful for that. He's actually not a bad leader either, I think. Let's have a look. Leadership 80, and he's got, +1 up to 3 squad, so he's a good leader. So each of the knightly orders that you can recruit, each of the tributes, let's just go through them quickly. So we've got the Hunters of Sigmar, that's 550, you get 12 knights and the Grandmaster. The Blazing Sun is more expensive at 650 gold, you get 12 and the Grandmaster. That's because Blazing Sun knights are just a bit better than Hunters of Sigmar, so let's have a quick look at those. And I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but here they are. Blazing Sun knights, they have lances, they have morning stars, they have better protection than the Hunters of Sigmar, lower map move though. And they have built-in fire resistance, which can be very useful. 15's a very high fire resistance. They're basically immune to fire. The Grandmaster of the Blazing Sun, I would also say, is a little bit stronger than Jerick Wildborn. He is a heretic, though, so he'll reduce your dominion. That's something to look out for. He has fear built in, which is good, and he has the Blazing Lance of Amidia, which is a magical lance that does lots of damage, and then it also does an Area Effect 5 fiery magical attack with its armor piercing. So he can blow a lot of stuff up when he charges. Good at clearing out the chaff. And he's got pretty decent stats overall. So that's the Blazing Sun. The Fiery Heart cost 800, significantly more, and you only get 8 Sacred Knights. So you must be 8 Knights rather. You must be thinking, why are they so expensive? Well, the word sacred is in there. They are sacreds. Unlike the other knightly orders, which are not sacred, Fiery Hearts do support blesses and things. I have designed them so that they're not that attractive for building blesses around, but you can do some bless stuff with them. Their bless is not very compatible with what you might want on Flagellants either, I think. So if we go back to the knightly orders, the Fiery Heart here, Knight of the Fiery Heart, you can see pretty good stats, nothing that amazing, but pretty good. They have slightly lower protection than some of the other knightly orders, but they do have built-in fire and cold resistance. It's only 3 of each, but it's okay. So yeah, they're not like an exciting sacred, but they're alright. You can see that they do have gold costs. You will be playing upkeep on them, commensurate to that, even though you're getting them for, in quotes, free when you build the tribute. And then the Grandmaster of the Fiery Heart is kind of interesting. He's got Priest level 1 built in so he can bless his own troops. He's got Inspirational 2, although he's not much of a leader. And he's got the good stats they all have. He also has the Sword of Fire and Ice, which is pretty strong. It gives you Air Effect 1 Frost Armor Piercing and Air Effect 1 Fire Armor Piercing, and they're very high amounts of armor piercing damage, and it's a magical weapon. So are they worth recruiting? I guess they're not worth a big bless, but I think the Fiery Heart are pretty cool at least. Then we've got the Tribute to the Reichsguard. The Reichsguard cost 1,100, so it's supremely expensive, but this is your big knightly order. This is Altdorf's primary knightly order. The reason you have to pay so much is you get a lot more of them, and they're really good. So you get a unique leader and a force of 15 knights, and those knights look like this. Oh, sorry, that's the summons. Reichsguard Knight. Good stats, good protection, good equipment, broadsword lance hoof, we like to see it, kite shield. Crucially, Sun Ore. Sun Ore is really good. Sun Ore 1 makes a massive difference to the amount of attacks they actually take, and because of their high protection and decent defense skill, the Reichsguard Knights very, very good at surviving. Having 15 of them at once is also very exciting. And then the leader of the Reichsguard is also super strong, because he is a very famous hero. He's got 3 misc slots. He comes with a built-in Rune Fang, which you can replace if you want to. And he's got Sun Ore 1, Inspirational 1, and he's a really, really good leader because he is a military genius. He's Kurt Helborg. So, pretty great, unique leader, very capable of leading the knights and rampaging around, very capable of staying alive. The Rune Fang itself is an armor-piercing magical weapon with good stats. So he can do some good stuff. He doesn't have a lance, but that's okay. He just chops people up with his Rune Fang instead. Then finally, we have the Tribute to the Knight's Griffin. The Knight's Griffin, you get 11 knights and 4 Demigryph knights, special Demigryph knights. So they're very similar to the Demigryph knights that you can recruit of 1 of per turn, but they're a bit better. This is 1,100 gold as well because you get, in total 15 guys, and you get some of them being Demigryphs, which are pretty exciting. The Knight's Griffin themselves aren't that exciting, but the Demigryph ones are. So Knight's Griffin, good stats, good map move, that's one of their things. They're a bit more swifter than the other ones. Good equipment, they're pretty standard though. And then the Knight's Griffin Demigryph Knight, very good stats, comes with the Demigryph Talons, of course, which are very destructive and armor piercing. And then the leader of the Demigryph Knights the leader of the Knight's Griffin here, Hans Duterberg. He's an inspirational leader. He's got very good leadership, so a great commander to get. Pretty good stats overall, plenty of hit points, and then has the Jüterbog helm, which gives him. I can't remember. Oh, it's just a magical helm that gives him decent protection and things. I think it's built into his stat line as well, gives him a bit more magic resistance and the like. He is also sacred because of the Jüterbog helm, so he actually can take a bless, but his knights are not sacred. Neither the demigriffs nor the night griffins are sacred. So that's the specific knightly orders. What is exciting about the knightly orders is that even though each of them individually cost 120 resources, if you look at the gold to resources that we're talking about here, this is a way of getting a bunch of heavy cavalry that would ordinarily cost a lot of resources. So here, like 12 knights, right? 650 gold, and you get a commander. So the recruitment points is not so much of an issue. 120 resources. If we were trying to get 12 order knights, that's 12 times 62. So it's basically 6 times as many resources if we were going to buy them individually. It's cheaper in terms of gold cost. You are paying a premium by taking one of these, and of course you're using your commander points for the turn. But during expansion early on, it's a way of getting a lot of knights quickly, and that's why they're strong. That's the same for all of the Empire factions. The knightly orders that they get differ, but that's the same basic idea. So that is all of the recruitable troops, the recruitable commanders, and we've talked about the knightly orders. So now we should move on to talking about their heroes, and then I will talk about summons after that. So heroes-wise, as with all Warhammer nations, they get some which are luck independent and some which are multi-heroes. So the luck independent ones, it doesn't matter what your luck scale is, you just have a fixed chance each turn of them turning up in your capital. The multi-heroes are based on your luck scales. So your multi-heroes, you've got Bright Wizard Lord, Grey Wizard Lord, Light Wizard Lord, and Celestial Wizard Lord, and I will talk about them when I talk about the summons. Those are the ones you have, Bright, Grey, Light, and Celestial. And then you also have the Noble of the Empire. The Noble of the Empire is basically like a general with better fighting stats, kind of like the Grandmasters of the Knightly Orders. But then he's on a Whacking Great Griffin, which gives him higher protection, the mobility of flying around, etc., etc. He's mounted, obviously. He's got fear from that, and he's got the Griffin's attacks, the Griffin's claws and bites, which are pretty decent extra damage. So he's got 1 broadsword attack, 2 Griffin claw attacks, and then the Griffin bite attack. So a total of 4 attacks coming out each turn. He is big, of course. He's size 6, I imagine. Size 5 even. But yeah, pretty good magic resistance. He gets a bit of a boost to that from being on the Griffin. If he gets killed, this guy, if his 30 hit points are lost, the Griffin will hang around and fight for a bit and then leave at the end of the battle, which is not, it's mostly a thematic thing. It's not going to be crucial in the battles. It's not something you want to count on because you don't want him to die. If you throw some kit on him, he's actually a pretty nasty thug, and you can get him as a multi-hero, which is cool. Then luck independent heroes, so these are your unique heroes. You have 4 of them. First is Ludwig Schwarzhelm, Champion of the Emperor. He is not much of a leader. He's got Inspirational 2, but he's only Leadership 40. He doesn't do formations and things. So he's not so much of a leader, but you can give him some guys. He's got full slots and 3 misc slots, which is very nice. He comes with good equipment, obviously, and good stats, including pretty high strength and hit points for a human. And he has the Broadsword of Justice. Broadsword of Justice is just high damage, very accurate, very good stats weapon. So makes him pretty good at melee combat. And he also has Unsurroundable 3, so he's a tier 3 guy. Then we've got a mage, the Patriarch of the Bright College. So he is basically a super fire mage. He's like a Bright Wizard Lord, which we'll talk about in a bit, but kind of amped up, everything turned to 11. Thyrus Gorman. Interesting. I put, yes, there is Thyrus Gorman. That's his name. So he doesn't have, he only has the 1 hand slot, because in his other one he's carrying this special staff, but you can replace the broadsword with something else. His basic stats are okay. He can fight, he can thug potentially, but really what you want him for is these magical abilities. So like any bright wizard, he casts Phoenix Power and Battle Start, and that takes him up to Fire 5, which is wild for a starting amount of fire magic at the start of a fight. He really is good at fire magic. He also comes with Earth and Death 1. The Death, not super significant, but I guess it could help you forge flaming skulls, things like that. The Earth is good because he can iron skin up and give himself temper flesh, stuff like that. He has super high fire resistance. He has a very strong fire shield. 14 AP damage is really good, so it can help him thug. He has firepower 1, which means that when he's in a hot province, he gets pluses to his attack skill and some of his other stuff. I think it's attack, defense, and a couple of other things, or strength maybe. So he likes to be in hot provinces. He's really attuned to the fire. And then he also has Firecaster, only in the realm of fire, but he has 25% extra range on all of his fire attacks, so he's really good for doing evocations. And then, of course, ritual range is also boosted by 1. He also has super high precision. So if you want somebody to do fire evocations, this is your guy. Even falling fires on him or even a fireball on him is really nasty because of his high precision. And that's partially because of this staff. He carries the staff of Volans. And then finally, he's a combat caster, so he can move in and, he's better at casting in close combat than some of the other stuff. So yeah, he's pretty great. He's really a one-trick pony in a way, but he's pretty strong. Then we've got the Emperor himself, Karl Franz. So Karl Franz is mounted on his Griffin Deathclaw, so a lot of the things that I've said about the Noble and the Griffin also apply here. He has really great stats, really great equipment, very high magic resistance. He is a fantastic leader of men. Obviously, we know that about Karl Franz. His Griffin is better than usual. He's Deathclaw, the special Griffin, so he does extra damage and things. He is not carrying the Hammer of Sigmar, Gal Maraz, and the reason for this is that at some point I would like to add Volton. Volton is kind of a divisive character in the lore, but Volton is the one who's going to be carrying Gal Maraz. The Emperor has his own Reichland Runefang, so he's using that instead. So again, good damage, good stats, armor piercing, very nasty, and he's got pretty decent strength and stats and everything. So he's a bit of a combat beast, bit of a good leader. You can do quite a bit with him. So that's the Emperor Karl Franz. And then the final hero, unique hero, is the Voice of Sigmar, Luther Huss. He is basically a mounted warrior priest, but amped up, and kind of like an arch-lector in that way. He has priest level 3. He has Dominion spread of 1, so that's similar to the arch-lector on the war altar. But he's a bit more of a combat beast as well. He also has Inquisitor, so Dominion spreader, Holy 3, Inquisitor, preaches as a Holy 6 in enemy Dominion. If you're trying to siege down somebody's cap or destroy their Dominion, Luther is fantastic at that. He's a pretty good leader. Well, he's not a very good leader in that he can't do formations and things, but he does come with Inspirational 2, so it can, increase the morale of some troops. And he comes with Awe 2, which is a pretty decent strength of Awe, which is good against anything that doesn't have good morale, and Halt Heretic 3. So against Sacreds, I believe they have to test against both of those. So he's got an Awe 2 test and then a Halt Heretic 3 test, even stronger Awe that's specifically against Sacreds. So he's pretty good and a bit of a combat beast, but mainly the most exciting thing about him is the Dominion Spreader, Holy 3, and Inquisitor. It's really good for trying to dom kill people. So next up, we will talk about summons. So when we talk about summons for Altdorf, what we're actually talking about is Wizard Lords, because those are the national spells that they have. It's the ability of the basic wizards to summon up the stronger, higher tier versions in each of their different colleges of magic. So let's just go through the different schools and dominions in order and see what Wizard Lords we can end up getting. So in Conjuration, at level 3, Sloth of Bears rather, at level 4, that's just a national thing that Dominions gives you sometimes, depending on your region. At level 4 we have Contact Amber Wizard Lord. 24 gems, 2 nature, 1 earth, so it can be cast by any Amber Wizard. The Amber Wizard Lord spell can be cast only by a member of the Amber Order, and it gives you an Amber Wizard Lord, so let's take a look at that. So as usual, I've provided preview sites so that you can see the summons. So we've got Altdorf summons here. Let's look at the Amber Wizard Lord down the bottom here. This fella riding a bear. So what can I say about him? Well, he's got great stats for fighting, tons of hit points because he has a combined profile of a giant bear and a wizard. That's why he's got lots of hit points. He's got full slots apart from the feet because he's a mounted unit. Or does he count as mounted? I'm not sure that he does, actually. Let's check. Oh, he does count as mounted, even though he's got a combined profile with a bear. And then, spells-wise, we've got Nature level 3, Earth level 1, Air level 1. These are great paths for buffing yourself up. Put some equipment on him. He can absolutely do some thug duty for you. Good hit points. He can regen and so on. He's got great survivals. He's got great map moves, so he's very mobile. He's got built-in animal ore, which can be useful sometimes situationally. He comes with a decent weapon built in, Thorn Spear, and then the bear itself can claw, bite, and claw, so 3 attacks from the bear plus 1 attack from the Thorn Spear. And of course you can replace the Thorn Spear with some better weapons if you want to. So pretty exciting thug. For 24 nature gems you can do quite a lot with him. Moving on, in Alteration, at level 4 again, so all of these Wizard Lords are at level 4 and they're just in different paths. And they all cost 24 gems. So what I might do is just show you all the different paths that they're in, and then I'll go through the Wizard Lords one by one to avoid me having to like hop back and forth to show them to you. So Contact Light Wizard Lord, you get a Light Wizard Lord. It can only be cast by Light Wizards, but of course they have Astral 2 Fire 1, so they can do that. 24 Astral Pearls. Astral Pearls have a bit of a premium on them, but still, the Light Wizard Lord. Amethyst Wizard Lord, 24 Death Gems. Not all of your Amethyst Wizards can cast this, but half of them can, so you shouldn't have a problem casting that. Those are your 2 in Alteration. In Evocation, you have the Bright Wizard Lord. He is slightly discounted. He doesn't cost 24 gems, only 22 fire gems. Fire gems for some people are worth a bit less. You can only cast with a member of the Bright Order, but of course it's only 2 fire and they all have 2 fire, so they'll be able to cast the Bright Wizard Lord spell. Construction, we have the Gold Wizard Lord at level 4, which is nice because you're going to want to get Construction level 4 anyway for various boosters and things. He can be cast by any Gold Wizard, 24 Earth Gems. Enchantment, we have 2, the Grey Wizard Lord and the Jade Wizard Lord. This should say Lord, but that's a typo there. I'll fix that. The Grey Wizard Lord can be cast by any of your Grey Wizards, 24 Air Gems. The Jade Wizard Lord can be cast by, I think, yeah, any of your Jade Wizards can do that because they have Nature 1, Water 1 built in. So we'll have a look at the Jade Wizard Lord in a moment. In Thaumaturgy, or Thaumaturgy, we have the Celestial Wizard Lord, 24 Air Gems. Can be cast by any of your Celestial Wizards. Is that true? I believe so, yes, because they do have at least Air 1, Astral 1. And then nothing in Blood Magic, obviously, so that's all 8. So let's go and have a look at those. So back to the Summon Preview site. Let's just go through these in order now. Amethyst Wizard Lord, so 24 Death Gems. What do you get? Well, he is old, but you do get a fantastic researcher, very strong research. You may want him doing research, but realistically that's not what you're summoning him for. You get yourself access to a Death level 3, which is very useful. With a boosted Death level 4, maybe you can climb up Death by using him. You have Astral 2, again very useful. You can do communions and things with him, and Death Astral is a nice combination for the kind of nether spells. And then we have Air. Death Air obviously has some very nasty things, Wind of Death stuff, so pretty useful. You can see they also have slightly elevated stats, but they're not really that different from the basic wizard stats, just a little better. The Gold Wizard Lord comes with Earth level 3, Water level 2, Fire level 2. So really good paths on the Gold Wizard Lord. Very strong, can cast a lot of useful stuff, and can do a crazy amount of forging as well with those paths. He can also do very alchemical things, like making the Green Lions. I can't remember what they're called, but Summon Vitriol, I think it is. And he has Forge bonus of 1, just like the other Gold Wizards. Bright Wizard Lord, he's the cheaper one, only 22 fire gems instead of 24. He's kind of similar to Thyrus Gorman. We talked about some of this stuff before. He's got firepower, he's got built-in fire shield, not strong, but he's got combat caster. He's got great fire resistance. He automatically casts Phoenix Power, so we've got an Fire 4 on battle start, and then he's got Earth and Death, so he can do various things with that, and he can maybe make the Skull of Fire booster. The Grey Wizard Lord, very similar to the Grey Wizard, has Stealth, but his stealth is much higher. He also has glamour and flying, so he's really, really mobile. He also has storm immunity, which can be super useful if you've got storm up and you want to do things with him flying around or escaping from the battle. And he's a spy, same as the others, and he has storm power, which can be quite nice. So he really favour a storm. Magic-wise, we've got 2 air, 1 astral, 1 death, and then random between astral and death. So if you want to get all the different ones, you'll have to get more than 1 Grey Wizard Lord. But you can see that those are useful paths, but he doesn't really go far up into having super high air levels or anything like that, but of course having storm power and flying and everything is really nice. Kind of a versatile Wizard Lord, that one. The Light Wizard Lord gives you access to Healer. So this is auto healer, so every turn he will heal 1 thing. That is a really strong ability, and lots of nations just don't have access to that at all, so that's very, very attractive to have that in the first place. And then he is obviously an absolute beast Astral Mage, and has 1 nature, 1 earth, and 1 fire as well, so he can cast a lot of things. He's a great communion master because he has the Mirror of Hish, and he has these wide variety of paths. It's also a great researcher, but again, that's probably not why you're summoning these guys up. So you can see once you've, as I'm explaining these, once you've gotten up to a certain level, you've got some research done, you've got some gems coming in, you can really pump those gems into really powerful combat magic, and you've got great magical diversity as well. So moving on now to the Celestial Wizard Lord. Comes in with much stronger Fortune Teller. The others have 8, he has 20, good research and everything, and shock resistance, basic shock immunity. 2 air, 2 astral, 1 earth, and then he's either 3 air or 3 astral. So a terrifying beast in combat because of the astral air, and can also do a lot of really cool rituals. so another very strong one. The Jade Wizard Lord is another one that comes with Healer, so it's another way of getting to Auto Healer 1, which is a very strong ability. He's actually Sacred, which is kind of cool. None of the other mages are, just the Jade Wizard Lord. He comes on a Unicorn, so he gets super high map move and a few other extra abilities, higher defense skill and things like that. And he has 2 Water, 2 Nature, 1 Priest level, which is cool. And then he either has Air 1, Earth 1, or Earth 2, or Air 2, which can all be very useful. So Jade Wizard Lord, another kind of versatile one, and gives you access definitely to Val Vapors if you want to be doing that through him. And we've already talked about the Amber Wizard Lord. So you can see it's very much a mage-centric and very high diversity nation. They do have decent troops, but they can struggle a bit in the early game because of that. But once you get going, this is a terrifying selection of summons to have, and I think they're relatively aggressively priced as well. Well, we've talked about their recruitables, their national spells, and their nightly orders. Let's have a quick look at the pretenders that are available for Altdorf. As you can see, it's a pretty limited selection. It's basically these humanoids, a few different monsters that are based on the fact that they're in a kind of a northern realm, a handful of titans, really not very many in total, and then some immobiles. I will consider adding some more things to Altdorf, I think, in a future version. This is perhaps a little bit too restrictive in terms of pretender choices, and this was a nation I did a while ago, and over time I've become a bit more permissive about which pretenders might make a kind of sense thematically. I personally don't want to make any pretenders for the Warhammer nations. I think Dominions has already got a bunch of interesting pretenders in there, so I would rather people just use those. But they do have a kind of a variety of magic and things and options. They've certainly got plenty of these kind of rainbow style low Dominion pretenders available, but I'm not going to go into this too much. This is the pretender selection, and let's talk a little bit about what scales might make sense for the Empire. So I think that if you're going to try for some kind of bless, you're going to want a fairly high Dominion score, just because the sacred that you're going to be producing is flagellants. To remind you of what the flagellants are like, they are quite bad, but they are very cheap. I personally wouldn't recommend doing a build with strong blesses based around the flagellants. You can, it can be really fun, but I don't think it's terribly effective. I think with Empire, what you want is to have fairly strong scales, but also, if you can, have an awake pretender available, because people have historically in the various Warhammer multiplayer games struggled quite a bit in the early game and been destroyed in their early wars. And I think that having a pretender that is either awake or dormant is probably a good idea to keep you alive in those wars. So I think with the Empire, because of your very high resource cost troops, you're probably going to want to take some level of productivity. You may even want to go all the way up to 3. I think you're going to want order. You're potentially going to want growth as well. I would tend to take a bit of misfortune if I'm taking order. You don't need magic, because you've got kind of mid-priced researchers, which are they're not sacred, so then you do end up with a lot of upkeep in the form of your like celestials and amethysts and things, but and the light wizards as well. But you do end up with relatively efficient and fast research, and I don't think that magic is necessarily that important for you. I wouldn't necessarily go drain though. You could, if you were going to try out this build, I don't know how this would work out for you. You could go with Sloth and then try to get your research done, get that benefit from the scholars. But you have to remember that the scholars are only 1 per turn because they're only in your capital, and you're only going to get 3 research points bonus from having gone into the Sloth. You'll have a lot more points available. If you were doing some kind of silly blast, perhaps you would do it. I think if you were going to try and get the extra research there, I would just take magic, and strong scales based on that. Something that you're going to want to consider is how you're going to do in the early game. If you're going to just concentrate on putting your money into troops to kind of keep yourself alive, because that is something where Empire has historically struggled. So they've got pretty good multi-heroes. That's another thing, is you might want to take kind of luck scales just because their multi-heroes are actually fairly strong. If we look again at their multi-heroes, we do have some good ones available there. These are all things you would be pretty happy to have as multi-heroes, these different lords, and the noble of the Empire as a thug. So there are choices to be made there. I would say that if we were going to summarize what Altdorf is like, as a nation, I would say it is reliant on human hit point and human strength troops. They can have very high protection and they can have pretty hard hitting weapons, but they don't have the kind of supernatural abilities and supernaturally high hit points and survivability that some of the other nations can have. They don't have a very wide variety of like resistances to things like poison and stuff like that. So their troops, while I think their troops are good and can definitely stack up to other nations, I do think that you're going to want a plan of how you're going to make up for the fact that maybe your troops are going to be overpowered by, particularly by strong enemy sacreds or strong enemy thugs. That's something that you're going to be worrying about quite a bit, I think. The strengths of the nation, you have this fantastic magic diversity that's really strong in the mid game and incredibly strong in the late game. You build into these wizard lords in every single path at level 4. You get these different wizard lords. The wizard lords have excellent magic paths and can do a lot of stuff. So you've got this massive number of magical options. It can be quite overwhelming, really, but it means that you should have a strong middle game and you should have an extremely strong late game. You've also got some Dominion management tools at your disposal. You've got Holy 3, you've got Dominion spreaders, which is extremely unusual to have. You've got Holy 2s with Inquisitor, which again is very unusual to have. So you have quite a few more Dominion spread options than most nations do. And I think that I would suggest taking some relatively strong Dominion to go with those Dominion manipulation options and maybe use the Flagellants with some kind of a minor bless. So those are my thoughts about scales. That's really everything that I wanted to say about Altdorf. I will do videos subsequently on Nuln and Biddenheim, which are the other two Imperial factions. I will try to avoid repeating the things I've said in this, and I will refer people back to this video. But that's everything I want to say about Altdorf. So I hope you found that interesting. This was something that was requested by a couple of people. So I hope that's useful to them. Give the mod a go. I'll put a link to the mod where you can download that in the description. I'll put a link to the Discord, and I'm always open for discussion about any of these things and hearing feedback. I'm really happy to talk to people who enjoy the mod. That's always very encouraging to me, and it's good fun to have those discussions. And I'll also put a link to my Ko-Fi page where you can give me a tip if you want to support me in making more versions of the mod. You don't have to, but the option's available to you. That's all for now, and I'll see you next time.